Hey man, how are you doing? It's been a long time since my last video, uh, but I'm here now. A few things have happened along the way, but something really interesting that I've learned about from an audiobook called "A Man's Search for Meaning" by Viktor Frankl. You probably know about it. It's a pretty popular self-help book in a way. It's about this man who goes through several concentration camps. He was a Jew. He is a Jew. I'm not sure if he's still alive. Hopefully he is. And he was a psychoanalyst, doctor or something, and he went through that entire experience of the Holocaust with a different perspective in mind. He could tell a lot of the mental processes that were going on within the other inmates around. He could like analyze himself in a much more complex way than the average individual at that time would because of his profession, right? And so he's brought up a lot of interesting points in that book. And one of them is that life is always going to be filled with suffering. Life will always have its fair dose of suffering, whatever you do, whoever you might be, no matter your social rank, no matter the types of people you surround yourself around, no matter what you might try to do, there will always be a certain amount of suffering that comes along with that. And he mentioned, if it's that type of suffering that can be taken care of, that you can get rid of, well, the logical thing to do and the best thing to do is to get rid of it, because unnecessary suffering that can be taken care of is just masochism. It's just you trying to inflict more pain on yourself because, I don't know, you like the pain or something, you like suffering or something, like for no reason. But he mentioned a few cases in which suffering isn't something that you have control over. Whether that's just you in your everyday life, in the way that you think, in the way that you live, it's like there are certain things that you just cannot get rid of entirely that will make you suffer. And I think these things are more or less subjective for all of us. But he gave the example of a lady that had her child who was she had two children, right? She was left, one of them was handicapped, like pretty badly, like she had to stroll him around in a wheelchair or something, and he was pretty old, right? So that was the way he was going to be his entire life. That's a messed up thing for a child, man. And then she had her second child, like a 12-year-old or something, that was healthy and everything, but the kid died of some sickness, I believe, if I remember correctly. And this lady, she attempted suicide, but in a way she was persuaded by her remaining child, the invalid one, the handicapped one, to not do it. And that child mentioned that he was happy with his life. He wanted to be alive. He desired to be alive. Although he was handicapped, although he could only walk, he could only be moved around in a wheelchair, he desired to live. He desired to be here in the living. And he was very glad that his mother didn't do just the opposite of that. Another case was with a patient that broke his neck. It wasn't a patient, right? Like just somebody that they thought about, and they mentioned this guy that was, I think he was diving, he was scuba diving or something, and he had like an accident, and he ended up breaking his neck from like here all the way down, so he was like fully paralyzed, and he was pretty much sedentary. He couldn't do anything. But this guy, he still chose to take up community college or something, to go to advanced lessons in, I cannot remember what he was trying to do. I think it was psychology. I think that was what he was studying. And he would attend classes from his bed, through a certain special device on an, that he could watch the class. He could ask questions. He could be asked questions and everything. He could participate in the class in an active manner. And he said something along the lines of, when he was asked about this, that I broke my neck, but it didn't break me. Think about that. I broke my neck, but that didn't break me. It didn't break me as an individual. The fact that I ended up going through that miserable fucking experience, man, because I don't even want to imagine that. That is miserable. I'm scared of that. Like that, I think that's one of the worst things that could happen to a human being, to just end up paralyzed like that. God forbid that ever happened to anyone. But it happened to him, sadly. But he didn't take it in a horrible manner. He chose to move on with what he had. He chose to play the cards that he was dealt, despite of his suffering. The same was applied to a cancer patient that was in his last few months, I believe. He didn't have much left, but he chose to live. He chose to be alive. He chose to spend the rest of those few months as best he could, because he was given a chance to be alive for a few extra months, despite of his suffering, despite of the situation that he was going through. And that really made me think about it, man. To most of us here, we're much luckier than that. We don't have to go through terminal cancer. We don't have to go through sedentary paralyzation from the neck down. We don't have two children, out of which one is dead and one is handicapped, invalid. We have to stroll them around in a wheelchair. We don't have that. Most of us, we're decently healthy human beings who have so much potential. But with potential comes the responsibility and the expectation of suffering. When you have a lot of potential to achieve something, you need to know that it's not going to be all flowers and sunshine and rainbows. No. Man, you're going to have to go through some shit. You're going to have to put some shit down. You're going to have to prove yourself in many different situations, whatever those might be for you. But that implies that there will be some suffering involved. And that suffering is for a good cause. Suffering is for a great cause. And that is for you to live a fuller life. That is for you to live with lesser regrets, so that when you grow older, you don't end up being one of those depressed old pricks, that just goes around, oh, back in my day, I was like this, and I was like, and now look at me, I'm a fucking invalid piece of shit. Now, you don't want to be that, do you? No. Who the hell wants to be that guy? Who the hell wants to be the all nostalgic prick that just cries about everything all the time and is a party pooper? You want to be the old guy that's gone for life, that has a sense of humor, that can take on anything that he's thrown at. Because he's lived a life that he knows he's lived to the fullest. Just know that in your suffering, there is something noble about that. There is something noble about you suffering for a greater cause. There is something honorable. There is dignity found in your suffering for something greater than you, for something better than you. Whether that's the fact that from now on, you've realized that the way to go in life is to exercise a lot, is to eat healthy, is to be here, is to journal, is to be mindful, is to pursue your goals 100% if you can, or at least as close to that, you realize like, man, that kind of sucks, you know, like I'm not gonna ever be able to play video games again and enjoy them, or like I'm gonna feel shitty about it, or you know, if I go back to playing video games I'm gonna lose everything I have here. Like I think it would be my case. Man, if I end up slacking around, like, you know, it's just there's a certain amount of suffering involved because you're losing things that at some point you were really drawn towards, that you had a connection to, and now they're just going away. And here you are, and you're living, and you're taking risks, and you're putting in effort, and you're putting in some fucking effort, man. You are putting in some fucking effort. That I can tell you. And sadly, it's not all gonna be flowers and sunshine and rainbows. You're gonna feel some fucking pain. You're gonna feel some pain. You're gonna feel some discomfort. You're not gonna like it. Most of the time, you're not gonna like it. There'll be certain points, you know, where you have like a mind revelation. You're like, oh man, I'm suffering. This is great. I like this, you know, and for like a few hours, you'll feel great about it. But then, you know, when a bad day comes around, when you don't feel like doing anything and you have to go to the gym and you have to work out and you have to go to like whatever sports practice you're going to because you really want to dedicate yourself to that. And afterwards, you're going to have to go to, or before that, you're going to have to go to school. You're going to have to be around people that you might not necessarily like, or you're gonna have to like do a bunch of schoolwork that you don't really care that much about, but you know you have to finish high school and that's the only way to do it. You're gonna have to suffer, man. Whether you want to go to university somewhere and study for something, you're gonna have to go through some suffering, but that is noble suffering because it's all for a greater purpose. Because it's suffering that will one day make you look back on it and think to yourself, man, I'm really glad I did that. This was my case with self-improvement in its entirety. You know, when I quit video games 3 years ago, when I quit most of my bad habits 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, you know, after a while, you know, during the process of quitting those things, it felt miserable, man. I felt bad. I felt weird about it. But now looking back on it, I'm so fucking happy I did that. I'm so happy I did what I did when I did it. You know, at 15 years old, I'm 18 right now. It's been 3 years in which I've grown more than I could ever fucking remember. 3 years in which I've gained so much more insight about life than I thought I could. I've experienced things that I only thought were fantasy before, really. I only thought were lies that was making up in my head, fantasy that was making up in my mind, just to get me by for the days. I've experienced those things and it's beautiful. And it's only because I've chosen to take on suffering, voluntary suffering for a greater cause, and I've gone through with it. It made me feel noble to know that I was suffering for something greater than me, you know? When you have a reason, what was that Nietzsche quote? A man can bear almost any how if he knows his why, or something like that. You know, if you know your purpose, if you know what you want, then you can bear almost any way, any kind of process that you will have to go through to get to what you want. You know, there's something noble in our suffering. You know, there will always be something noble in the suffering of those who choose to suffer for a greater cause, for something better than them. So keep that in mind. When the next time you're gonna have to go out and run and it's like it's muddy outside and it's cold and shit and you really don't want to do it, remember that you're suffering for a greater cause. You're suffering to build discipline. You're suffering to keep yourself healthy and fit. You're suffering to build up your character as a human being. And this applies to every single little thing in your life. Whether that's exercise, whether that's school, whether that's relationships, whether that's anything it might be, whatever it might be. You're doing it for a noble cause. And if you're not doing it for a noble cause, then try not to do it or just try to spend less time on it. And just try to focus more on the things that truly matter to you. the things that you could tell a beautiful story about them later on in your life. Yeah, man. I know it's hard. I know what I just said sucks, but it's the truth. And perhaps, a few weeks from now, a few months from now, we'll look back on it and be like, no, I'm really glad I listened to that dumbass kid. Maybe I'm really glad that at least I took in that one thing that he said about something noble in his suffering, because it's not what I came up with, it's what Viktor Frankl came up with, a guy who was in 4 concentration Nazi camps, and he came out alive, and he went through all of that, and this is what he came up to. So, I'm really glad perhaps that I listened to what Viktor Frankl had to say. That's a better way to frame it. So yeah, man, I'm not gonna waste any more of your time. I really hope this helped you out a little bit, gave you a little bit more insight into what's going on, and I'll see you next time, man. Have a good one. Cheers.